It happened under cover of night, no motorcade, no press alert. Just a shadow slipping through Lambeth Palace's side entrance. A secret meeting between King Charles and the Archbishop of Canterbury, unlogged, unacknowledged, and now exposed. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The truth is, this meeting wasn't on any official calendar. No royal schedule reflected it. No aides briefed the press. In fact, only 2 senior staffers sworn to absolute silence were even aware it was taking place in real time. Originally summoned to Clarence House under the guise of a private spiritual consultation, the Archbishop was redirected at the last minute to Lambeth Palace, where security protocols were immediately enacted to isolate the meeting. A full communications blackout was triggered. 3 hours vanished from palace records, erased by silence and sealed lips. But silence has never lasted long inside royal walls, especially not when the topic is Prince Harry. Insiders now confirm that Harry's name came up repeatedly during the tense exchange. Not in the manner of public scandal or protocol missteps, but in terms of spiritual crisis. Charles, described by one aide as visibly moved, reportedly made an emotional appeal, speaking less as a sovereign and more as a grieving father. He asked not about strategy or image, but about forgiveness, about faith. Witnesses say the king struggled to reconcile the moral burden of kingship with the hollow ache of estrangement. He wasn't there to protect the crown. He was there because the crown had failed to protect what mattered most to him. What was said in that vaulted room may never be fully known. But what's clear is this. It wasn't policy that prompted this meeting. It was desperation. Desperation from a monarch who feels the weight of a fractured family colliding with the crumbling legitimacy of a monarchy at moral odds with itself. And though no formal statement was issued, subtle movements began in the days that followed. Meetings rescheduled, public engagements cancelled, and whispers faint at first about a letter from California that may have pushed Charles to the brink. But to understand what led Charles to break royal code, we must look at what happened just days before, when a sealed envelope from Montecito shattered the fragile calm. It arrived with no warning, just the royal crest of Sussex, and a cryptic message, to be opened in person by His Majesty only. What Harry wrote inside triggered more than heartbreak. It triggered a reckoning. There were no couriers, no diplomatic handoffs, just a discreet, hand-delivered envelope addressed directly to the king. Not even Camilla was informed when it was placed into Charles's hands, reportedly during a late afternoon briefing at Clarence House. According to palace insiders, the moment the seal was broken, the air in the room changed. The letter did not open with warmth or sentiment. It opened with a declaration of disappointment, of betrayal, and of finality. Harry, who had once begged for reconciliation in private, now wrote with the tone of someone who had lost faith completely. He accused his father not just of emotional distance, but of moral failure. In stark and unrelenting language, he questioned the very foundation of the monarchy, the silence, the complicity, the traditions that, in his words, protect power over people. And then came the line that reportedly made Charles's hands tremble. Harry wrote, "If the institution will not speak, I will." A veiled threat, perhaps, but also a promise, a signal that time was up. That silence was no longer sanctuary, it was guilt. The letter hinted at upcoming interviews, possibly another written memoir, and above all, a public reckoning, if no steps were taken to acknowledge the fracture tearing through the royal family. What alarmed Charles most wasn't the tone, it was the fact that this time, Harry hadn't reached out to talk. He had written as a man preparing for battle, not reconciliation. Gone was the son desperate for understanding. In his place stood a prince who had seen too much and forgiven too little. Witnesses say Charles sat in silence for several minutes after reading it, his expression unreadable. Then, without consultation or delay, he instructed his private secretary to make contact with Lambeth Palace. No advisors, no press team, just a direct call. Within hours, arrangements were being made for the Archbishop to meet with the king urgently, privately, and off the record. Because Charles understood something his aides had not yet grasped. This was no longer a personal matter. It was an existential threat. If Harry's letter reached the public without intervention, the entire monarchy could find itself caught between truth and tradition and unable to survive either. But the Archbishop wasn't just called to counsel a king, he was called to contain a crisis that could fracture the monarchy from within. Sources close to the palace say this wasn't a meeting between monarch and church. It was a father desperate, broken, cornered, asking if he could still save the son he's already lost. Behind the locked doors of Lambeth Palace, the conversation was not wrapped in royal protocol. There were no staffers taking notes, no photographers capturing a handshake. It was just Charles and the Archbishop, two men with centuries of institution behind them, now brought together by a single, fractured relationship. According to insiders, Charles began not with strategy, but sorrow. He reportedly admitted that his public stance toward Harry, the stripped titles, the clipped statements, the silence was a form of discipline that may have pushed his son too far. And now, in the quiet, it was regret that filled the room. Not rage, not ego, just the fear that something sacred had been lost beyond recovery. He spoke of Harry's memoir with visible discomfort, not because of what it revealed to the world, but because of what it revealed to him, that his son had carried wounds for years, some of which he'd inflicted, knowingly or not. The Archbishop, caught between the divine and the crown, offered no quick solutions. His role wasn't to fix the monarchy, it was to guide the man wearing its weight. Charles reportedly asked whether forgiveness, in the biblical sense, could be extended not just to Harry but to himself, whether a legacy marred by silence and scandal could still be redeemed by one final act of humility. He floated the idea of a private reconciliation, a spiritual ceremony, perhaps in Windsor's private chapel, where titles didn't matter and truth could be spoken without the cameras. But there was urgency in his voice, a tremor of time slipping away. And for once, it wasn't about approval ratings or constitutional duty. It was about something far more human. The possibility that he was running out of time not just as king, but as a father, age, illness, legacy, all of it pressing down like a crown made of stone. The Archbishop reportedly listened in silence before placing a single hand on the king's shoulder. No answers, just presence. But even that small gesture was enough to steady Charles, at least for the moment. Because beyond the press briefings and the ceremonial pageantry, what remained was the aching hope that something could still be salvaged from the ruins. That history didn't have to repeat itself, that maybe, just maybe, there was still a path home. But while Charles was pleading for healing, others in the palace were already preparing for war. The Archbishop wasn't the only one summoned that week. Behind the polished doors of Buckingham, senior courtiers gathered not to mend fences, but to draw battle lines. In the hours following Charles's emotionally charged meeting with the Archbishop, a very different atmosphere settled over the palace. If the king was searching for grace, the institution around him was preparing for war. Queen Camilla, insiders say, was the first to raise objections. She reportedly made it clear that any softening toward Harry, especially after the memoir, the interviews, and the damage done would not only undermine the family's authority, but cast doubt on her own standing beside the throne. Her influence over palace direction in recent years has grown quietly but powerfully, and her voice in the room was unmistakably firm. The monarchy cannot afford another act of weakness. What followed was a confidential strategy session that included legal minds, senior courtiers, and PR veterans who've weathered decades of scandal. The room was divided not between generations, but between survival and sentiment. One notable absence? William. Sources suggest he was deliberately left out of the initial talks, his closeness to both the public and the press viewed as a complication in an already unstable equation. The decision to keep him in the dark didn't go unnoticed, and it set in motion its own ripple of mistrust. Meanwhile, the palace's communications team began sketching out reactive strategies templates for every possible outcome. Would Harry release the letter? Would Charles's plea be leaked? Would there be a photo, a meeting, a truce? And if so, how should the monarchy spin it without appearing weak or hypocritical? These weren't just public relations dilemmas. They were constitutional landmines. If Harry were welcomed back even in the smallest symbolic gesture, what precedent would it set? Could a royal once stripped of titles and trust be granted spiritual redemption without political consequences? As debates escalated behind closed doors, one advisor was heard calling it a royal Cold War behind velvet curtains, a haunting description for a family slowly turning on itself in the name of preservation. No decision was final, but the tone had shifted. Charles's heart may have cracked open in the presence of the Archbishop, but the institution surrounding him was already hardening its shell. Reconciliation wasn't being prepared, it was being barricaded against. And while palace halls echoed with division, a surprising voice outside those gates was quietly gaining influence. He left the meeting with no statement, no expression, just a single file folder tucked beneath his cassock. But days later, the Archbishop began setting something quietly in motion. While Buckingham Palace thrashed in turmoil and Charles wrestled with regret, the Archbishop of Canterbury took a different path, one shrouded in silence, but charged with purpose. Those closest to the church knew something had shifted. Without fanfare, the Archbishop initiated discreet communications with clergy inside Windsor's inner sanctum. It wasn't framed as political. It wasn't labelled as crisis management. But beneath the scripture and formality, a new directive emerged. Prepare for the possibility of reunion not on the monarchy's terms, but on moral ground. In parallel, the Archbishop began probing the very rituals that defined royal unity. Behind closed doors, he launched a quiet audit of reconciliation protocols, what existed, what was tradition, and what could be reimagined. His inquiries weren't theoretical. They were surgical, deliberate, urgent. Then, in a twist no one inside the palace expected, the Archbishop reached out to Princess Anne. The woman known for her stoic detachment and unswerving loyalty to duty had, it seemed, become a touchstone for truth. Sources say their conversation was long and unfiltered. Anne didn't speak of politics. She spoke of her brother, not the sovereign, but the man. She confirmed Charles was struggling more than his advisors knew. That beneath his rehearsed resolve, he was fraying. That his need to mend things with Harry wasn't strategic, it was spiritual. The Archbishop took it in, not as a counselor to the monarch, but as a shepherd witnessing a family on the verge of spiritual collapse. Days later, during a seemingly ordinary sermon at Canterbury Cathedral, his tone shifted. Without naming names, he spoke of forgiveness without condition, of sons and fathers, of wounds too long ignored. The press noted it. Social media lit up with speculation. Was this a message? A signal? Or a test balloon sent into the wind to see how far the institution would bend before it broke? Behind palace gates, anxiety grew. Then came the rumours first whispered among ecclesiastical staff, then leaked to royal watchers. The Archbishop was considering stepping in not as a religious figurehead, but as an active broker of peace. He was said to be laying the groundwork for a meeting. Not one sanctioned by courtiers or choreographed for cameras, but one that might truly force the family to confront itself. He moved quietly, cunningly, with no crown to protect, no bloodline to defend, just a belief that reconciliation, when born from truth rather than fear, could heal more than politics ever could. But while spiritual leaders planned in silence, Harry's next move would force the royal family to respond ready or not. The world stopped when Harry stepped in front of the camera, calm, composed but with fire in his eyes. And then he said it. I still believe my father can do what's right, but he has to choose between the crown and the truth. It's so. The message wasn't leaked. It wasn't whispered through aides or teased by tabloids. It was deliberate. A direct shot fired into the heart of the monarchy, unscripted, unmediated, and devastatingly clear. Prince Harry, once exiled by choice, now stood at the center of a storm he could no longer ignore. In just under 3 minutes, the video ignited something Britain hadn't felt in years: uncertainty about the very institution it was raised to revere. I've remained silent out of respect, Harry began. But silence has been mistaken for surrender. He confirmed what had been speculated for weeks, that there had been ongoing internal conversations, not through official channels, but through clergy, through quiet mediators, through cracks in the palace's marble facade. What stunned many was his admission that he'd heard from Charles. Not an apology, not a plan, but a signal, a whisper of possibility. "I believe in redemption," Harry said, his voice cracking. "But redemption doesn't come dressed in robes. It walks in truth, barefoot and vulnerable." He didn't name William. He didn't need to. His statement wasn't a call-out, it was a crossroads. Then came the part that ripped the curtain clean off the stage. This isn't just about family anymore. This is about legacy. About a crown built to lead, not to hide. Britain deserves more. My children deserve more. "What kind of monarchy do you want?" Within hours, the internet was ablaze. Millions watched, re-watched, dissected every syllable. Some called it brave. Others called it treasonous. But no one could ignore it. Hashtags flooded every platform. Number truth or throne. Number Crown vs conscience. Number stand with Harry. Public figures weighed in. Celebrities, clergy, even a handful of MPs. In pubs, in offices, across dinner tables, the debate raged. Was Harry defending the monarchy or dismantling it from the outside? For those inside the palace, the impact was seismic. PR teams scrambled. Charles reportedly watched the video alone twice. Camilla is said to have demanded a firm response. But others, even long-time skeptics within the firm, saw something else. A reckoning not just for a family, but for a system too long insulated from real accountability. For the Archbishop, it was confirmation that time was no longer a luxury. For William, it was a wound reopened before it could scar. And for Charles, it was the call he could no longer defer. Now the question wasn't whether reconciliation was possible, but whether it would come in time. The Archbishop delivered it personally. A plan, a place, and a date. Either the king takes part in a symbolic act of healing or risk losing what little moral ground the crown has left. Inside Clarence House, the envelope landed not with ceremony, but with tension so thick it felt irreversible. The plan was unprecedented, a closed-door spiritual retreat, to be held at a secluded royal estate, far from the public eye, away from the cameras, the press, and the rehearsed scripts. Those summoned: Charles, William, Harry, and the Archbishop himself. No aides, no courtiers, just blood and belief, facing the cracks of a dynasty in silence. Attached was a second page, a leaked memo, already making quiet rounds among insiders. It outlined a renewal of vows, not between spouses, but between crown and country, a promise to recenter the monarchy around truth, transparency, and reconciliation. The symbolism was powerful, the timing brutal. Camilla, already bruised by public criticism over her handling of the Harry saga, reportedly erupted. "We do not negotiate with threats," she allegedly declared, tearing the memo in front of Charles's senior aide. Charles, however, remained quiet, not resistant, just haunted. Those closest to him described the king as adrift, caught between legacy and loss. He hadn't agreed yet, but he hadn't refused either. And then, unexpectedly, William gave his blessing, though it came with strict conditions. No cameras, no leaks, no spin. If this was to happen, it would happen with dignity, or not at all. Within hours, the royal machine shifted into overdrive. Clergy were briefed, security details adjusted, backup plans were drafted. The palace's PR wing walked a razor's edge between denial and silence. Public curiosity soared. What was going on behind those walls? Was the royal family healing or preparing for collapse? Whispers trickled in. Some aides believed the entire retreat was a trap, a way to get Harry back into the fold without offering true accountability. Others saw it as the last possible lifeline. A senior official summed it up best. The monarchy isn't just at war with Harry, it's at war with itself. The clock was ticking. The date was set. All that remained was the king's final word. And then, on a morning clouded by palace anxiety, a car pulled up to Clarence House. Unannounced. Unscheduled. Inside was someone no one expected. Not a rival. Not a politician. A figure whose mere presence would turn whispers into shockwaves. Because what walked through those doors wasn't protocol. And as the royal machine spins into overdrive, a single, unexpected presence arrives at Clarence's house, changing everything. She hadn't been seen in the UK in nearly 2 years. But Meghan's return wasn't just about family. It was about control, narrative, and finally being heard on her own terms. When the car door opened and Meghan stepped out beside Harry, jaws dropped across the country. It wasn't just a visit, it was a statement. There had been no official announcement, no press preview, not even a whisper from palace aides. Her arrival blindsided Buckingham and ignited a media firestorm. Tabloids scrambled. Protesters and supporters swarmed palace gates, their chants a cacophony of rage and hope. But this wasn't a publicity stunt, it was a move calculated with precision. Meghan had come not to watch from the sidelines, but to step directly into the storm. Inside the palace, aides were stunned to learn she would be accompanying Harry to the spiritual retreat. Some believed it was an ambush, others feared it would unravel everything. No one had given formal clearance, and yet she was there undaunted, unapologetic, and deeply aware of the pressure her presence would ignite. In the days that followed, Meghan quietly reached out to unexpected allies, Zara Tindall and Princess Beatrice. Conversations, while private, reportedly centered on collaboration, healing, and a bold idea co-authoring a cross-household charitable initiative that redefined the monarchy's modern role. It was a move straight out of Meghan's playbook, bridge building through media-savvy service, but not everyone saw it that way. Online, the nation split down the middle. Was this genuine outreach or calculated manipulation? Was Meghan softening the edges of a broken dynasty or hardening her grip on its future? Inside the palace, the tension boiled. Senior advisors debated cancelling the retreat entirely. Even Charles seemed caught in a whirlwind of indecision, his silence deafening. But Harry remained unmoved. "This isn't just about us anymore," he reportedly told a confidant. "It's about what comes next for the whole family." And then, just when it seemed the family might fracture beyond repair, a single photo sent shockwaves through the monarchy. It was blurry, unofficial, unstaged. But the photo told a story louder than any statement ever could. Charles, William, and Harry together again. But what does it mean? And what comes next? The image, leaked from deep within Windsor's walls, spread like wildfire across the globe. There were no press releases, no royal insignias stamped in approval. Just a grainy, intimate capture of something far more explosive than a headline. Charles reaching toward Harry's shoulder, his expression unreadable. William standing nearby, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, not in anger, but something closer to reluctant concern. Instantly, the internet fractured. Was it staged? A cynical PR stunt to soothe a fraying monarchy? Or was it raw and real, a fleeting moment of genuine connection in a family at war with itself? Conflicting sources only deepened the mystery. Some palace insiders insisted it was a carefully orchestrated leak meant to reset the narrative. Others swore it wasn't meant to be seen at all, that the photographer, a trusted aide, had broken protocol in an act of quiet rebellion. Regardless of origin, the effect was seismic. Millions weighed in online. Commentators cried manipulation, supporters wept with cautious relief, and critics scoffed at the royal performance. Yet beneath the noise, something undeniable stirred hope, fragile and trembling, but alive nonetheless. The Archbishop of Canterbury, whose silent maneuvers had long operated in the background, finally confirmed what many suspected. The meeting had taken place. A spiritual gathering had occurred, away from the cameras, behind the thick stone walls of Windsor. But when pressed about the result, about whether forgiveness had been exchanged or wounds merely exposed, he offered nothing. "Some truths," he said, "require time to become visible. For the monarchy, that time may be slipping away. The photo has become a symbol of possibility, of illusion, of crisis contained but not resolved. Will words evolve into action? Can decades of bitterness be softened by one shutter click? The institution hangs on the edge of that answer. In homes across Britain and beyond, the question lingers like fog. Was this the beginning of healing, or the final image before collapse? And as the dust settles, one thing is clear. This wasn't just a secret meeting, it was a spiritual battlefield for the soul of a crumbling dynasty. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.